Hello world. The dead end shaft out of the subterranean chamber, or what they like to call the unfinished room. Well, let's look at this. Number one, it's at an elevation slightly below the floor line of the shaft on the other side. Although I drew it straight here, I'm going to redraw it because I suggest you put eyes on it yourself. If you go to lost1.giza.ws or lost1.greatgizapyramid.com, Bren Forrester made a great video. We're about 30, 32, 34 minutes into it. I forget the exact number, but it's in the 30s. He is walking down here with a camcorder, and the lights happen to be out. There was no power on that day. And he shines a light and his camera into the structure, into the shaft. And you can see, since there's only one light source, that the roof and the walls are actually ribbed. Now the other video I suggest you go to is GoPro, GoPro 2015.giza.ws or GoPro 2015.greatgizapyramid.com, whichever one you feel is easier. There's a video done, it's a GoPro done by, I think his name is Alexander or something like that. I should actually have these names memorized, but he was kind enough to use a GoPro and he walks through the whole structure. And here about 34, 36 minutes into it, again in the 30-minute mark, he is kind enough to crawl down this shaft where you can get a nice, really good view of it. Now, it's not super good because he keeps looking down as he's crawling. If somebody could do it again and actually do it with a Rylo, R-Y-L-O, which is a 360-degree camera, if you could walk through there with one of those or send a little robot car down there with it and get a nice 360 view, I would kiss your toes and maybe even do other stuff. But you can see this is about 53 feet long, I think is the magic number. Not 53 degrees, 53 feet long. And I guess that would be feet, wouldn't it? As you go down the shaft, about, if we divide it into like 5 segments, the last 20%, the last fifth of it, it comes to the east and then goes back to the west and then goes straight. So if we look down upon it, it comes over, jots out. I guess I should do it the right way. Jots out, comes back, and then goes straight. And like about so. Now I intentionally made it so it looked like it came to a smaller point here because when I look at the GoPro, it does look like it thins right near the end. And also I suggest you watch the GoPro. You'll notice how there's divisions in the wall at those points, and I think there's another division here, and there's definitely a division right as it goes into the, as you're crawling out there. You can see these because I do believe that this was all molded. I believe, here's my current working theory, is that they used a device like what we used to cut through the Channel between France and England and bored a nice 20-foot cavity that went down and across, and then backfilled it with what we like to call limestone, but I believe was a composite material that they made and poured into there. And you can see where they molded it in sections, and I think they divided at these points because they probably put a structure within there and then poured it around it, and they needed it where they could get that molding out, and they, because of how it zigzags, they couldn't pour it and then get that structure out, so they had to do it in phases. So you can see that. In fact, when you look at the descending shaft, there are 2 spots where they did it again, and you can see where there's a break in the mold as if they were pouring like cement. And I believe the reason they used the limestone-like composite material was because they needed something which was non-conductive, and they needed something non-conductive because if you follow my view on how I believe the Giza Pyramid worked, they needed a conduit there, and then the only two spots where there are areas where it touches earth, ground, natural rock is in the grotto and in the subterranean chamber in the pit. That would be your cathode and your anode. And when you look at the entire system, and if you just imagine this is the anode and that is the cathode, and you mentally picture it as a high school experiment, the rest of the system falls into place, because that's what they were doing. Now, back to the dead end shaft, the ribs. When you look at my view of the system, as this shaft meets what they like to call the descending shaft, there's a spot where the oxygen, which would be coming out of here, filling the room and venting out of the system, would be designed to bubble, or to form a bubble, and then bubble out up into that shaft, causing a water hammer. That water hammer is what caused John Cadman to find the evidence of cavitation and evidence of compression and other scarring that the water hammer left during its function. And you can tell from the older pictures from the 1800s, where you see the piles of sediment, the frequency and or wavelength of the water hammer, and how much, we can calculate the energy behind it. Now that energy would echo through the system as a compression wave and would work its way down the shaft. This, I didn't draw it super well. It's not quite that zigzaggy. It is such that about halfway down here, and if you watch the GoPro video you can see it, you can see from there to the end, but you can only see about, if this was the width here, you can only see about maybe 3/5 of it. The 20% there and 20% there is lost to view because of the way the zigzag is done. And, ironically enough, the way that it looks like it thins, it actually, the part that you can't see is not there. So, I don't know if that's part of the communication or that's potentially the function, and this wavelength, this compression wave, when it comes down here, will cause a back pressure which will push the water, and something unique will happen because of the way it's zigzaggy there. Not sure. Not an expert on hydraulics. I would like to put this into a model and actually play with it and see what's occurring and see what sort of functions we can get out of here. If we get some really high pressure zones and or really low pressure zones, we get some really good cavitation or really unique spots where the water gets to such a high compression that it will boil just because of the compression. I don't know. I'd like to find out. I'd like to model it. Somebody who's can drop this into a CAD and could run it through some simulations. We can get 90% of the measurements off of, I can tell you a good percentage of them, and we don't have to have accuracy, because when we put it in there, we can see what's occurring. Then we can tweak it a little bit to actually see if other functions will occur, some hidden functions that we don't know. And I'm not going to say water is going to explode or something, or that like gold is going to magically appear out of it. No, but we could be able to get some unique feature to occur, because cavitation is a unique feature, and if you put water under high enough, if you actually drop water to a low enough pressure, it'll boil, and if you can squeeze it hard enough, let's find out what happens. Now, we are going to complicate this, because I do believe, and in nature, as you electrolyze more and more and more, you actually are going to wind up getting some heavy water out of the deal. It's just going to happen. You boil water for long enough, you're going to get heavy water. You don't believe me? Well, look it up. It's not something you come across too often. People aren't usually boiling their eggs for 3-4 weeks straight. But people who work with hydrogen fuel cells and or work with batteries that they're always putting more and more water in, over time you wind up with more and more of a concentration of heavy water within your battery. You can look Cody's Lab on YouTube. He has a really good example where he was working with his batteries for his I forget what he was doing with it, but he has a bunch of batteries, and after years of running them, he actually took it and verified that he actually had a pretty good concentration of heavy water. So this stuff will occur in nature. This whole structure used many features of nature that we did not even know or comprehend until the last century or two, when we actually started playing with electricity. Because the average person didn't play with electricity till the last century. You know, it wasn't until the beginning of the last century, in the early 1900s, that you had the Tesla-Edison wars. You didn't have Faraday rubbing his rods until, like 100 years before that. Benjamin Franklin, supposedly the inventor of electricity, even he wasn't that long ago. So, in the big picture of things, we're still in our infancy. But these guys, they knew a whole lot, and they knew it an era ago.